Hello, and welcome to Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Before we begin, please hit the like button if you like the video, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more from me, and you can also join my Patreon. We have a big goal there. We're starting on that soon, and you can be a part of it. I'll talk about the goal at the end of the video. A couple days ago, I brought you a story from one of my favorite documentaries of all time, Cropsey. And this week, I'm doing it again. I think I've been subconsciously saving these stories for you for when the channel rebranded and I can discuss more of these dark stories. I am excited for this episode today. This is on my new playlist, Dark Conspiracies, and it is a fascinating story. Like with all conspiracies, you will have to decide for yourself how much you believe, how much you don't, and whether or not you think it's a conspiracy at all or just the truth. I've been fascinated with the Chernobyl disaster for many years, but there is a story within that story that is almost too strange to believe, and it is the story of the Duga radar. There is a fantastic documentary made about this story. It came out in 2015 and it's on Plex for free if you'd like to watch it. The title is the same as this episode. This is the story of one of the greatest intel disasters in history, one of the greatest military defense failures. It is the story of the Russian woodpecker. I'm your host, Stacy Lee. Let's get into it. The Soviets began an early warning radar program designed as an anti-ballistic missile system. The experimental designs were meant to detect rocket launches from Baikonur Cosmodrome, which is a spaceport operated by Russia located within what is now Kazakhstan. This is where all crewed space flights are launched in Russia. The station was built in 1955 and served as the chief base of operations for the Soviet space program. Baikonur Cosmodrome served as the launching point for Sputnik and Vostok, and it is currently under the command of the Russian military. Now, back in the 60s, this system, designed to monitor Baikonur Cosmodrome, was named Duga, which means arc or curve in Russian. It is an over-the-horizon radar system used solely for detecting rocket launches. The Duga system was meant to be very powerful. It uses shortwave radio bands. Over time, this station was named the Russian woodpecker by shortwave radio operators for its sharp, repetitive tapping noises at a frequency of 10 hertz. Now, this is all very technical stuff, but I know there are those of you out there who will understand it, and I want to make sure I cover the bases of what the system is designed to do before we get into the meat of the story, because it matters. This is what the Duga 1 looks like. I will not even pretend that I can explain to you how this works, even by reading a description of how it works. I have absolutely no understanding of this type of technology at all. But basically, the radar is used to detect and issue a warning within seconds or minutes of rocket launches that would give the Soviets the time necessary to study the attack and plan a response. It's a defense system. The Soviets had a very poor warning system in place before the Duga, and the Duga over-the-horizon system would greatly improve upon what they had. Over the horizon means just that. It is so tall that it can detect missiles coming from miles away without any interference from the mountains. The first Duga was built in Ukraine and when tested, successfully detected rockets launched from the Baikonur Cosmodrome 1,600 miles away. So that's very impressive. The prototype was replaced by Duga 2 on the same site in 1972, and the government was very happy with the reports of the success of the project. Now, look, this is Cold War Russia. We have no idea what the truth is regarding anything that came out of that region in that era. But it is our understanding that the Russian people were told of the great success of the Duga radar system, that the country was pretty much invincible now and safe from rocket attacks, and that the Russian military was the greatest in the world. The Duga radar system was touted as the pinnacle of technology and war defense, and it was a shining gem in the Soviet military crown. And then shortwave radio operators began to notice something. Around 1976, a new and much more powerful signal was detected simultaneously with the Duga system's radar, with the sound coming from the Russian woodpecker. The amateur radio operators were unsure if this new signal was coming from the Russian woodpecker or if it was a separate radar system altogether. The woodpecker sounds at 10 hertz are caused by an interference at 27 megahertz. CB radios used that frequency in the 1970s. Now, the little I do know about radio frequencies, I know from a very costly debacle in the music industry. It was, I would guess, 12 to 15 years ago. We had all invested in these new, very expensive, custom molded inner ear monitors. And I had spent thousands of dollars on mine. They're the kind that you go to an audiologist for. They take a mold of the inside of your ear and then custom make an inner ear monitor for you and you only. Obviously, the monitors go in your ears, and then you wear a pack that's clipped to the back of your pants that uses radio frequencies to talk to the live sound engineer, the other instruments, everything that runs through the mixing board, which is the hub for everything that happens in a live show. So here I am, I'm thousands of dollars into these things, and then the government announces that they are taking the frequency the monitors work on and basically confiscating that frequency for more bandwidth for AM radio. They're the government. They can do stuff like that. So all of a sudden, me and thousands of other musicians were left with very expensive, very worthless monitors. Of course, the inner pieces, the custom molds still worked, but the system that they were attached to did not. The frequency they were designed to operate on was no longer available for us to use. That's my limited knowledge of radio frequencies, but I do know that you have to tune into the right frequency to make certain devices work. Part of what the shortwave radio operators were hearing was an interference at the 27 megahertz band. Now, this got people talking. Why? Because remember, this is Cold War era Soviet Union. They don't share information with the outside world. So some of the shortwave radio guys, who were also government guys, began talking about this frequency interference. And they go to NATO with the information. NATO does an investigation and learns that yes, there is some type of radar being used in Russia as missile detection, and they name the interference Steel Yard. Now, that's about all we know on this because it's NATO, it's classified, but obviously the Allies want to be aware of these types of things because they're a defense tool, and if war were to break out, the Allies need to know what type of missile detection systems the Russians have in place. It was a big deal. Civilian amateur shortwave radio operators get really into trying to detect and uncover where the woodpecker sound is coming from. And over the years, the signal got stronger and stronger. The government, our government, was most concerned that it could have something to do with broadcast jamming, specifically jamming the broadcasts coming from American submarines which use radar to communicate. That was the concern at the time. Yes, our military was concerned about missile defense, but it was also concerned about broadcast jamming, which would essentially cripple a submarine or an aircraft carrier, even an aircraft itself. Amateur radio operators then attempted to jam the signal by transmitting synchronized continuous wave signals at the same pulse rate as the offending signal. They even formed a club, and they called it the Russian Woodpecker Hunting Club. So now we have a basic understanding of what a Duga radar system is, a very basic understanding, and what the Soviets were building them for. But the Duga radar and its existence and purpose are not the conspiracy in this story, not even close. What if everything I just told you about the Duga radar being a massive success and a gem in the Russian military crown was total and complete bullshit? What if billions of government dollars were sunk into this project and it was a horrible, humiliating failure? What you're going to hear next is either going to make you roll your eyes out of exasperation for something so ridiculous, or it is going to enrage you and confirm every bad thing you believe about men in high world government positions and the lengths they will go to in order to cover up their terrible failures. You will have to be the judge as we continue with our story, but the conspiracy starts with a very important date. September 1st, 1986. A Russian commission was set to go and inspect the Duga to ensure that it was working properly and that all of the billions of Russian dollars had been spent wisely on what had been reported to be one of the greatest successes in military defense of all time. This council was independent and worked for the government and was set out to make sure the funds had been spent appropriately. Before that council could take that trip and reach the Duga radar and make that inspection, the world would change forever. A test is being conducted at Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant. The day shift crew has been instructed to run the test, and a special team of electrical engineers has been brought into the site to oversee the results. The test begins, and as planned, a gradual reduction in power output was observed until the power level reached 50% of its normal level by the beginning of the day shift. As part of the test, the emergency core cooling system is disabled. But what happened next changed everything. A nearby regional power station unexpectedly went offline at 2 o'clock that afternoon. Because of this power outage, the Kiev electrical grid controller asked that the further reduction of Chernobyl's output be postponed, as the power was needed to satisfy the peak evening demand as people were arriving home from work. So the test at Chernobyl was stopped. The day shift at Chernobyl went home, and the evening shift arrived. Despite delaying the test, the emergency core cooling system was left disabled. Now, protocol dictated that it should have been reactivated as soon as the test was postponed, but that is not what happened. For the next 11 hours, the nuclear reactor was left to run without the cooling system, and therefore without the emergency protection that would indicate trouble with the system. Just an absolute and monumental failure, what the term epic failure was designed for, but we're going to get into this. At about midnight, the Kiev grid controller allowed the reactor shutdown to resume, the test to resume. But again, a simple shift change had major consequences. The night shift was not prepared to carry out the test, and within 5 minutes of resuming the test, the 3 night shift workers with less than a year's experience between them noticed that the nuclear core was heating up rapidly. This is where it gets very technical, and I will not go into the details of what happened, even just by reading them to you, because I have no understanding of them. But this was the beginning of the greatest nuclear disaster in history. The core began to melt down, causing steam explosions all over the plant. The reactor lid was torn off the fuel channel piping in a massive explosion, and soon deadly levels of radiation were spilling into the atmosphere. The nearby city of Pripyat, where everyone employed at Chernobyl worked, was not immediately evacuated. People got up and went about their daily routines with no clue that one of the deadliest and most devastating events in world history had already begun. Chernobyl was still run by authorities in Moscow, and Pripyat is governed by Ukraine. And if you know the history between these two countries, not good. The hero of the film, the Russian woodpecker, our protagonist, he is what I would call an anarchist. He's an artist. He's an agitator. He makes some statements in this 2015 film about Russia and Ukraine. Every one of them have come true. Every single one of them. And he makes a statement at the end of the film that makes my blood run cold. He said, "Taking Ukraine is the first step in returning to the Soviet Union. World War III is next." But yeah, let's keep talking about banning books and drag queens. I think we are closer to World War III than a lot of people want to admit right now, and we're focused on such stupidity. But anyway, with the threat of World War III looming over our heads, let's continue with our story. The Ukrainian government wasn't alerted because the two governments don't communicate well, and Russia is so quick to try and hide anything negative from the public. Not until 11 a.m. that morning did buses arrive to begin busing citizens out of Pripyat. And the word was beginning to spread that the reactor was melting down. Now, like I said, I'm a bit obsessed with Chernobyl, and I kind of want to do a story about it by itself. I have some really cool information and photos to show, so I'm not going to go into much of that today. But we all know it was epic, the worst nuclear disaster in the history of the world, and it changed the world forever. How in the world could such a careless mistake have been made with all of the systems of checks and balances in place? How on earth could an entire shift of workers, with full knowledge that a check had been started and then stopped, forget to reactivate the cooling system at a nuclear reactor? 3 head engineers leaving the day shift and 3 head engineers coming in on the night shift, and not one of these 6 people remembered to turn the cooling system back on? How is that even possible? Well, if you ask Fedor Alexandrovich and his supporters, it isn't. And it wasn't an accident at all. Buckle up, my friends, because this gets crazy. This is Soviet Minister of Communications Vasel Alexandrovich Shamin. He went to work in 1968 as a deputy minister, and from 1980 to 1990, he served as the Minister of Communications of the USSR. He has extensive scientific education and was one of the creators of Duga. As the head of the communications industry, he was solely responsible for green-lighting the Duga project and for allocating the initial billions of dollars to build the system. He was also solely responsible for the continuation of allocation of funds for the project. Shamin is credited for heading a program in Russia that ultimately allowed 98% of the population in the USSR to watch television, more than the one government station they'd had before that point. He's printed more than 100 scientific works, and he is the author of 10 inventions. He also won the title Laureate of the Lenin Prize and rose as far as anyone but the dictator does in Russian politics. So this was a very powerful man from that era, the most powerful in Russia with the exception of one other. And he had allocated billions of dollars to a project, a missile defense system that did not work. Why? 2 words: Aurora Borealis. The entire Duga system was designed to give Russian authorities 25 minutes from the time a missile was launched to attack them, but there was a huge problem that its creators did not understand at the time. The Aurora Borealis prevented the Duga radar from penetrating North America. It didn't work. That's not part of the conspiracy. It didn't work. This was not the only reason that the Duga radar was a failure. I read a lot of very technical things and didn't understand any of it, but there is no question this $7 billion experiment was a complete and utter failure. Do you know what the penalty of misappropriation of government funds was in the USSR? Death. Is it possible that Vasel Shamin, one of the most powerful men in the USSR, orchestrated the Chernobyl disaster in order to cover up the complete failure of his biggest project, the Duga radar? Did he take the opportunity to melt the core at Chernobyl down in order to stop the inspection that was scheduled for a few months in the future? I know. Many believe it's not only possible, but that is exactly what happened. Knowing that an inspection of the Duga radar was set to take place on September 1st, 1986, and knowing that the findings of that commission would surely be that $7 billion had been wasted on a worthless, failed system that was no more than a pile of scrap metal, many believe that Vasel Shamin set a plan into action. He waited for his moment, and then, when he heard that a routine test was taking place on the same day as a major power outage in Kiev and that the test had been stopped, he took his shot. When the day shift left their post to go home and the evening shift arrived at work, the conspiracy theory states that Shamin called the control room at Chernobyl and instructed the engineers not to reactivate the cooling system. Some of these engineers have been interviewed about this, and they vehemently deny these claims. Now, first off, I was surprised to hear that these men were still alive. They were there at Chernobyl that day. But 2, again, it's the USSR. You do not go against the government. You do not speak out in any way. You do not resist, and you do not speak when you are told to stay quiet. But there is someone who refuses to stay quiet. This is Vladimir Karov, and he served as the head of the Chernobyl Investigation Committee. He investigated the disaster. I do not understand the nuances of why some of the men involved are terrified to speak out on camera and others are not. But Vladimir Karov is more than willing to state on film that there is a possibility that the Chernobyl disaster was not an accident. He's on record from decades ago, stating it was an epic human failure and one he cannot understand, seeing as how 3 engineers left the day shift and 3 engineers came in the evening shift, and none of them did their job. Not a single one of them thought to reactivate the cooling system on the nuclear reactor's core. He states he simply cannot fathom how that happened. And I have to tell you, if there is anything that draws me towards the conspiracy side of the story, it's that fact. You could understand if 1 person or 2 people made a mistake, right? 6 people forgot to turn on the cooling system of a nuclear reactor's core, 6 people who knew it had been turned off for a test that didn't happen. That is probably the most damning piece of truth that I personally feel points to a phone call instructing workers not to reactivate the cooling system. Again, this is Russia. You mess up something like that, you don't even get a trial. They're taking you out back and putting a bullet in your head. You're telling me 6 men forgot to reactivate this cooling system? You know I'm not much of a conspiracy theorist, but I don't think you really have to be in order to recognize that something is very, very strange about that. There is something else that happens to the filmmakers that are making this documentary about these events. Fedor Alexandrovich gets a phone call from a state police sergeant telling him to abandon the project, and Fedor becomes so frightened for his son's safety that he disappears and tells the videographer he is not going to continue with the project. Well, the videographer and Fedor are arguing about this and taking some time away from the film. The videographer goes to a protest and is shot by a sniper while at a government protest. He's holding his camera up, filming the protest, and he is shot right through the hand, barely misses his head. Someone was aiming for his head. And this is at a protest where most of the protesters were just being gassed. So that is also very telling to me. He survived, he's okay, but he was shot. So this is basically the conspiracy, and I cannot wait to hear what you guys think about this in the comments. I would really like to go into this a little bit deeper if you guys are interested in it. There is some new information, and there has been some more documentaries that have come out about this. Some people hear this story and literally just roll their eyes and think that is the stupidest thing. Why would Russia cover up one failure by causing another huge failure? And I totally understand that and think that has some validity. But what if it was just one guy? You know what I mean? What if it was the concern of one guy having his reputation, his legacy, and losing his life over this failure? Would a man be willing to cause such a failure in order to cover up his own failure? And to that I say yes, they would be. We know the kind of people that run the governments. We know who they are. It doesn't matter what your politics are. We know what they do. So I am really excited to hear what you guys think about all this. In the end, whenever I visit this story, I am left with more questions than answers. Is Fedor Alexandrovich an eccentric conspiracy theorist? Is he an agitator that constructed this wild fabrication in his mind and became obsessed with a few details that make this story out to be more than it is? Or are those few details the most important facts surrounding the Chernobyl disaster that have been brushed off for far too long? I don't have any answers for you. If I did, this wouldn't be a conspiracy theory. But as it stands, it's not a theory to many. It is one of the most evil and diabolical acts ever committed by a powerful politician. Around 50 people died immediately, and many more died over time. The entire region has been poisoned really forever. I think it was like 300,000 years or something like that. So not forever when you're talking in an eon sense, I guess. Is it really possible that one man would do all of that just to save his own skin? Like I said, I think we all know the answer to that. But the question remains, did it happen? Thank you for joining me today on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee and our very first episode on the Dark Conspiracies playlist. Hit the like button if you like the video, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more, and you can always join my Patreon. We have a big goal, and it is this. We would like to raise money to donate to police departments that have cold case DNA in storage that cannot be tested because there's no money to test it. There are thousands of sexual assault kits sitting in refrigeration that have never been tested. We would like to pick a case, raise the money to get that kit tested, and then donate it. The kits cost between $500 and $750 each. If we all give $1, we can test a kit. I'm going to have more information for you on that next week. But by joining Patreon, you keep the channel alive. If the channel stays alive, the donations keep coming. I sure appreciate you, my friends. I know you have a lot of options to watch, so the fact that you spend a little bit of your day with me means the world to me. Happy New Year! Stay safe and be kind to each other, and I will see you next time on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Bye.